Hi everyone, and welcome to Jane Talks Murder, where I'll be talking about and reviewing an episode of Poirot, Murder, She Wrote, Diagnosis Murder, or Jonathan Creek. Today I'm looking at Poirot, Death in the Clouds, or as I like to call it, that time the wrong person got murdered. We begin the episode with some stock footage of Paris and Poirot wandering around sweating his tits off before chatting to this lady Jane. Great name, and heading to the hotel where Cecily Hornbury is bitching about the holiday, and then Poirot, before tennis! Lots and lots of tennis. Everybody clap. Cecily, her hubby, and this lady Venetia chat about the game, and Jane talks to Norman, telling him she's an air stewardess, and I'm getting Brad Dourif vibes from this dude. Cecily is obnoxious before being eyeballed by this lady. Cheers to being creepy! And then she goes to gamble, but loses. And Stephen and Venetia talk about what a dick Cecily's been lately, with Poirot passing by. Cosplaying as Cruella de Vil, Cecily goes to see the creepy lady and flips her shit at her before leaving. And Stephen asks her what the fuck she's been doing at 3 a.m. And when she sasses him, he leaves. Whoa, things have gone very Alice in Wonderland all of a sudden. And Poirot meets Jane, talking to her about art before they take a walk, and Jane takes him to the tennis, which he's delighted by, until he's sat next to Cecily, who is still bitching. More tennis ensues, and afterwards Venetia tells Cecily off for how much she's drinking, but she don't care, and then drunkenly yells at the creepy lady. And then everyone gets on the plane, and is that Uncle Quentin from the Famous Five? Poirot wraps himself up all snuggly, too bad he sat behind bitch face, and this guy refuses to hand over his case for reasons. Something to do with African pipes. Uncle Quentin there is a famous writer, and Cecily breaks a nail, notices the creepy lady, and calls for her maid before the plane takes off. And Poirot looks about as thrilled as I do when it comes to flying. Jane serves drinks, with Clancy going to the back to get a book, and Poirot napping back there. Man, I wish I could sleep on planes. And there's some sort of buzzing insect annoying everyone, which this guy swiftly squishes. Poirot wakes up to find himself still in the air, and when the steward goes around with coffee, he finds the creepy lady dead. Everyone goes to nose at the body, and they think it's a wasp sting, before Poirot finds a teeny tiny dart right next to the body, which Clancy recognizes as poisoned. The plane lands, and everyone sits around dramatically while the police search their bags, and Poirot is called from the room where Jap fills him in on the dead woman, Giselle, who was a money lender, and he asks if he has any ideas, even though he was asleep. Jap noses through DuPont's bag, which of course looks sus because of the pipes, which he puts in his mouth. Dude! And Poirot tells him about Clancy, as he's up to date on the subject due to researching for books he writes. And Jap continues searching, with Norman up next, and his bag has an empty matchbox and a dentist coat, which shoots him right to the top of my suspect list. Cecily, meanwhile, is bitching about the whole thing, so Clancy tells her to calm down, and Henry complains that he needs to clean up the plane. But dude, active crime scene! So Poirot asks him and Jane about the wasp, and tries to establish the time of death. Henry says Giselle flew with them regularly, but not usually that flight, and Jap calls him onto the plane where a wooden pipe has been found with a teeny piece of paper in it, making the passenger in that seat very suspect.
I was sitting here, Chief Inspector.
Oh, but Poirot insists he follow procedure while he clears his name. Venetia calls Stephen to tell him about the murder, while the French police go to Giselle's house, where her maid Elise hurriedly burns some papers. And Cecily is bitching yet again. Is it too much to ask for this twat to be murdered? Jap has no time for this bullshit, but Poirot encourages him to talk to her, and she's real rude, but does tell them that nobody but the staff went past her during the flight, and she didn't see a wasp, and she lies about knowing Giselle. Everyone is let go, with DuPont asking Jane who Poirot is, and Jane tells Poirot Clancy walked to the back of the plane during the flight, and Norman admits to going for a pee, and he asks Jane on a date, so that's nice, except he's probably a murderer. Poirot agrees and points him out as a likely suspect along with DuPont, and asks for Jane's help to pilfer all of Daniel Clancy's books. Poirot is reading when he gets a late night visit from Lord Hornbury, who says his marriage is a bit shit and his wife was a former actress, but despite knowing the victim and being a total dick, she's not capable of murder. Poirot and Jane go to Clancy under the pretense of being stumped by the case and being big fans of his books, and asks for his thoughts. Clancy says he's terrible at solving crimes and his detective character is the one that works them all out. And this guy is nuts because he says his fictional character told him to get the book during the flight. Poirot calls him out for saying he researched poison for his book because none of his crimes cover the subject, and points out a pipe similar to the one found on the plane. Suddenly, we're at a wedding where the bride rushes off and goes to the French police to announce she's Giselle's daughter Anne and wants her inheritance. Japp tells Poirot he's spoken to the Hornbys and Venetia, who confirm Cecily's gambling problem, and they fly back to Paris where Poirot dicks around with a pipe and steals this poor woman's seat, and Japp tells him off for playing around with evidence. Poirot concludes that Cecily couldn't have shot the dart without being spotted, but Japp disagrees, and it seems to spark an idea, and they go to speak to Anne, but she's vanished, and Japp is annoyed with the French police and walks out, where Poirot points out the paper in the pipe was a price tag, which means it was bought in Paris. Jane goes to the hotel in Paris and is rushed off by Dupont, who lied to find out where she was, and takes her to a museum, because he needs money for an archaeological dig and thinks she would be able to convince Poirot.
Poirot? Give money to the digging up of Africa?
They go to Giselle's house where Elise says she has no family, but gets emotional over the name Anne, and explains there was a baby that Elise took care of, but she was taken away, and shows them a picture. Cute! Japp comes in saying they found the shop the pipe was sold at and asks Elise about Clancy, Dupont and Lady Hornby, who says she doesn't recognise any of them, but does say Giselle didn't take her usual flight because it was fully booked. Venetia and Stephen hang out on horses discussing how much better it would be if Cecily just confessed, and Fournier confirms Giselle's will leaves her fortune to Anne and a small amount to Elise. Poirot bugs the guy who booked Giselle on the flight because according to Jane's friend, the earlier flight wasn't full at all, and he admits that a guy bribed him to book her on the later flight.
I didn't know she was going to be murdered.
And he describes a young American man, which is confirmed by the shopkeeper, who shows him the pipe tray which comes with a free dart. Poirot agrees to donate £500 to Dupont's dig, and he discusses with Japp which of the women on the flight could actually be Giselle's daughter, and Japp thinks Cecily, after Elise finally admitted she came to the house a lot. But if she is the killer, then who was the American guy who bought the pipe? Japp gets a call that Cecily has gone missing, and Norman arrives in Paris, so Poirot splits, choosing to sit with Henry, who says when he cleared Giselle's table on the flight, she had 2 spoons for some reason, which Poirot finds important. Jane and Norman walk by Giselle's house where they're eyeballed by Elise, and Anne rocks up to the police station to apologise for taking off like she did, and presents her birth certificate. But Poirot says she looks familiar, and speaking of familiar, Cecily is gambling again before kissing this rando Raymond. Poirot and Japp read about it in the paper, and Norman plays dress up before accosting Cecily on the street, and Raymond is not impressed and acts out, so Cecily dumps him before running straight into Poirot, and she sits down for a smoke. She admits that she was in a lot of debt and Giselle threatened to expose her, so good job she died. And when Poirot gets back to the hotel, Jane catches a nail on her glove, which solves the whole case, and they speed off because Anne is in danger. Mind the cyclist, but she's left with an American man. This guy got attacked by a tree. The police board the train, but they're too late. Nice death face. And Poirot says it appears to be suicide and invites them to gather with everyone else relevant to the case. Poirot lays things out. The pipe was a red herring because no one could have used it without being seen. And Japp judges Dupont for killing the wasp, with Poirot adding he was the one who mentioned it when they discovered the body. But the wasp didn't kill her either. Someone jabbed her in the neck with the dart, but only 3 people passed her: Jane, Henry, and Clancy, who jabbers on about his detective again.
You mean he's a madman? A murdering madman. Keep him away from me.
Henry is cleared, so that throws suspicion on Jane. But hang about, Cecily's maid looks familiar. It's Anne, but she didn't kill Giselle either. And now it's Norman's time in the spotlight. See? Told ya! And on the flight, he put on his dentist coat to act as a steward and took a spoon to Giselle, only to kill her, and tried to frame Cecily, before changing back again and returning to his seat. but Norman says it's bullshit. Poirot explains that Norman met Anne while she was working for Cecily and formed a relationship before discovering who she really was, and they planned to murder Giselle and frame Cecily, and after they got married, Norman poisoned her to stop the truth getting out, and he's tricked into admitting it. Jane is confused and Norman is arrested, and Poirot tells Jane Norman was in love with her. Japp jokes that he thought Poirot murdered Giselle in his sleep, and Poirot says the empty matchbox gave Norman away. Okay, I love these kinds of episodes, known as closed circle mysteries, where a crime takes place in a location that's cut off with a small pool of suspects, such as a train, a boat, or in this case, a plane. I wish more time had been spent in the air, like the Murder, She Wrote episode The Corpse Flew First Class, because the plane and body had landed a third of the way through, and unfortunately I worked out who the killer was as soon as they found the empty matchbox in Norman's case, and he said he'd gone to the toilet, so I was just kind of waiting for Poirot and the episode to come to the same conclusion. It would have been better if we'd seen the contents of a few more bags so it was less obvious it was Norman, but I did find it a nice surprise that the victim wasn't Cecily, seeing as she was the least likeable person in the room, and she wasn't even the killer, which is a nice subvert of expectations. Although it does mean we were stuck with her irritating behaviour for the whole duration. As is standard for these longer Poirot episodes, there's a lot of random plot threads, like that guy's archaeological dig, Stephen and Venetia maybe having an affair, Raymond showing up for no reason at all, Elise looking after the baby even though it made no difference, and Clancy being absolutely insane. But there are two parts that I find really clever. First off is no one noticing Norman walk by them on the plane because he was dressed like a steward, which is a running theme in this show that people don't pay any attention to those in the service industry. Can confirm this is also true for those who work in retail, and the episode The Yellow Iris is a great example of this. And the other thing is the maid and Giselle's daughter being the same person. She comes directly at the screen early on in the episode, and you see her again briefly on the plane, but it's not super obvious who she is when you see her again as Anne. Poirot says she looks familiar when he sees her but doesn't know why, which is exactly how I felt. So much so that I almost googled the actress, but I'm glad I didn't because the reveal of who she is pretty awesome. All in all, it's a well-crafted and enjoyable mystery, even if the killer was pretty obvious. We have two victims, Madame Giselle and her daughter Anne, who were both poisoned by our killer, Norman Gale, who killed Giselle for her money/revenge for his lover Anne, who he then killed so his secret wouldn't get out. So there you have it. That was Death in the Clouds. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, or come say hi on social media. If you enjoyed this video, then please hit that like button, it really does mean a lot, or consider subscribing if you want more videos like this one. Alternatively, feel free to check out my other YouTube channels. Thank you so much for watching, I'll speak to you soon, and keep an eye out for clues.